The rain pounded heavily against the glass windows as Clara typed frantically. She was in an abandoned building, the perfect place to hide from unwanted eyes. But Clara wasn't just hiding, she was on the hunt. The chance to access a government server had come up unexpectedly, a security loophole someone had left open, perhaps unknowingly, and she seized it. The name Ghost appeared in a folder protected by heavy encryption. Clara knew that whatever was in there was important. This kind of encryption indicated more than just military reports. It was something hidden, something that wasn't supposed to be found. She bypassed the firewall guarding the folder, and within minutes, she had access to the main file. Ghost was a code, but not just any code. At first glance, it looked like an artificial intelligence algorithm, but Clara quickly realized there was more to it. The code could track global patterns, from earthquakes to heat waves, predicting disasters before they happened. But what made her freeze for a second wasn't the predictions, it was the results. Clara saw information about events that hadn't happened yet, detailed and complete. It was as if Ghost had the power to shape reality according to its predictions. A silent alarm went off. Clara stopped, realizing the danger too late. She knew she had minutes, maybe seconds, before her location was traced. As her fingers danced across the keyboard to erase her tracks, the sound of footsteps drew closer. She shut down the access and closed her laptop, stuffing it into her backpack. Clara bolted, hearing the echo of footsteps in the empty corridors. Someone was after her, and it wasn't just anyone, these were agents, judging by their gear and precision. Clara ran toward the emergency exit, taking the stairs two at a time, her heart racing in time with the steps chasing her. Deep down, she knew that if she got caught, Ghost would be the last thing she ever found out about. The cold, damp night air hit Clara as she finally reached the exit. Outside, the empty, dark parking lot stretched out like a minefield. Clara dashed down the ramp, scanning for any abandoned vehicle she could use. She spotted an old sedan and quickly forced the door open. Once inside, she ducked into the darkness of the car, watching through the window as the agents searched the area around her. With a deep breath, she drove off, crossing the parking lot and disappearing into the mist as she processed what she just discovered. But Ghost lingered in her mind. It was far more than she'd expected to find, and it both terrified and fascinated her. Clara knew she was onto something deep, something dangerous, and that this was only the beginning of a long and risky journey. Clara drove through the deserted city streets, weaving through narrow, shadowy roads toward the only place where she felt remotely safe. Ivan's old warehouse was in an abandoned industrial area, far from any kind of surveillance. He was one of the few people who knew how to disappear, someone who could help her decipher what she had uncovered. With her hands still shaking from the chase, she sent an encrypted message, arranging a meeting. There was no time to waste. The ghost code kept hovering in her mind like an incomplete puzzle, and every second felt more urgent than the last. When she arrived at the warehouse, a chill ran down her spine. The gate was ajar, and the place seemed quieter than usual. She stepped out of the car and cautiously entered, noticing the monitors still on and Ivan's laptop glowing on the table. As she approached, Clara saw him unconscious on the floor, face down beside his chair. She knelt down and checked his pulse. Ivan was alive, but it looked like he had been out for a while. Clara glanced around, hoping to find some clue. Files were open on the screen, and a portable storage device was plugged into the laptop. She knew she didn't have much time, so she started transferring the device's contents to her own computer. As she waited, Clara noticed notes scattered across the table. Ivan had been doing some detailed research on Ghost. There were diagrams, charts, and even names of public figures, people Clara recognized from recent and not-so-recent events. She deduced that Ghost wasn't just a predictive algorithm, it was a system capable of manipulating outcomes, perhaps even controlling catastrophes to ensure certain decisions were made on a global level. It was a lot to process, but Clara knew she was facing a discovery that could change everything. The problem was, now she was a target too. The sound of footsteps approaching the gate caught her attention. Clara quickly tucked the device into her backpack and erased the contents on Ivan's laptop, leaving everything as it was before. She couldn't risk being caught with any evidence. Looking out the window, she saw a shadow getting closer and knew she was in trouble. There was no easy way out, and she would have to improvise. Clara hid behind a stack of crates, watching as a man, likely an agent, entered the warehouse and began searching the area. He seemed to know exactly what he was looking for, and for a moment, Clara held her breath, hoping he wouldn't find her. With careful steps, she moved toward the back door, aiming to escape undetected. Once outside, Clara dashed back to the car. She knew she had to disappear again, but this time, she needed to go farther, somewhere they wouldn't find her. The contents she'd retrieved from Ivan would help her understand more about Ghost, but they also made her a more valuable target. Now, she wasn't just a witness to what she had uncovered, she was the keeper of information that could dismantle the organization behind the code. Speeding through the dark streets, Clara mapped out a route to a safe house in a neighboring city. It wasn't ideal, but for now, it was the best she had. As she drove, she mentally reviewed what she had learned. The Ghost code seemed to be part of something much larger and more dangerous than she had anticipated. Ivan had clearly known more than she did, but now he was out of reach. She needed to understand what he had uncovered, and fast. Clara had no allies besides Ivan, and now it seemed like she was completely alone against a force that appeared to have eyes and ears everywhere. Exhaustion gripped her, but she knew she couldn't stop. Not while Ghost continued to haunt her thoughts. Clara reached the isolated cabin by a deserted lake. The place had been abandoned for years, but she'd always kept it in mind as a safe retreat. Internet access here was limited, but it was enough to do the basics without drawing attention. After confirming she was alone, Clara settled at a small wooden table with the device she'd taken from Ivan. She plugged it in and began reviewing the files. The data was protected by a more complex layer of encryption than usual, showing that Ivan knew exactly what he was doing. She found reports on an organization known only as Oracle, which seemed to control the Ghost code and use its predictions to manipulate the global landscape with precision and invisibility. As she read on, Clara discovered that Ghost didn't just predict events, it monitored them in real time, adjusting the algorithms according to new data. The scale of the operation was enormous, with predictions being relayed to governments and corporations worldwide. These data points were used to shape decisions that affected millions. However, among the documents, she found references to something even more sinister. Ghost was being adapted to selectively trigger disasters, manipulating the environment and global infrastructure to create favorable conditions for specific interests. A fire here, an earthquake there, all orchestrated to serve a larger purpose. With this information, Clara knew she couldn't continue alone. She would need allies, but she had no idea who to trust. A notification on her phone alerted her to unusual activity. A group of vehicles was approaching, and Clara had only seconds to react. She grabbed the device and tucked it deep into her backpack, scanning the area for an escape route. But the roads around the cabin were being blocked off. She knew it was only a matter of time before they found her. With no options left, Clara decided to hide in the woods and wait them out. She knew that if these were the same agents as before, they wouldn't give up easily. The dense, silent forest surrounding the cabin provided natural cover, but the sound of voices and branches breaking underfoot reminded her that she was far from safe. Clara crawled through the underbrush, trying to avoid any noise that might give away her position. She saw the silhouettes of the agents combing the area, each one carrying advanced equipment, probably thermal sensors capable of detecting body heat. She knew she couldn't stay hidden for long. Holding her breath, Clara moved along the uneven terrain until she reached a clearing where the darkness was even deeper. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, and she forced herself to think rationally. She needed to create a distraction, something to make them believe she'd already escaped. Rummaging through her backpack, she found a small emergency communication device she kept for dire situations. It had a direct line to a few contacts but also a built-in EMP pulse, useful for temporarily disabling electronic equipment within a short range. Clara activated the device and tossed it in the opposite direction, causing interference that forced the agents to scatter, trying to pinpoint the source of the signal. Seizing the confusion, she ran through the trees, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the cabin. The fog that had settled in the forest helped her escape, allowing her to evade detection and make it back to the road. Back on the pavement, Clara walked for a few miles until she found an abandoned house where she could take shelter temporarily. She knew she needed to analyze the device's contents before they tracked her down again. Plugging it back into her laptop, she reviewed a list of locations Ghost was monitoring. Among them, one name stood out: a corporate building in New York, with coordinates marked as a convergence point for multiple predicted events. Clearly, something significant was set to happen there, and Clara couldn't afford to waste time. Despite her exhaustion, she knew the next step was to head to New York and uncover what was being planned. As she hit the road once more, Clara felt the tension mounting. She knew Ghost was about to become a real threat and that she was the only one who could do something about it. But to succeed, she would have to evade the agents, discover the true extent of the code, and stop the organization behind it from carrying out their plans. The information she'd retrieved from Ivan continued to fall into place like pieces of a puzzle, revealing bit by bit the scope of a network far beyond what she had imagined. To Clara, it all seemed to indicate that the world's fate was about to be rewritten, and that she was a key player in a game whose rules she didn't yet understand. Clara reached New York at dawn, after hours on the road with careful stops to ensure she wasn't being followed. The city, with its skyscrapers and lights that never dim, was the perfect cover for whatever operation involved the Ghost project. As she parked on a quiet street, Clara checked the coordinates again. The corporate building was a few blocks away, hiding in plain sight. It looked like any other glass tower, but Clara knew the secrets she was looking for were hidden inside. She approached the building, blending in with the pedestrians while observing the security guards at the entrance. The elegant facade revealed nothing, but Clara knew the real access would be underground. She found a blind spot near the building and hacked into the camera system. Through the feed, she could see inside, identifying an elevator restricted to high-level employees. Clara waited for the right moment, slipping through a side door and taking the emergency stairs down to the basement. With each step, the tension grew, and Clara could feel herself approaching the point of no return. On the lowest level, she found a reinforced door with a security keypad. After a few attempts, she cracked the code and entered. Inside, the space was sterile and impersonal, lit by a harsh, white glow. In one of the rooms, she found a series of monitors displaying live images from around the world: hurricanes, earthquakes, protests, all coordinated in real time. The Ghost code wasn't just tracking events, it was causing them. Every disaster, every movement of people, seemed to be manipulated by an algorithm calculating impacts with deadly precision. Clara analyzed the screens carefully. On one of them, a list of future events caught her eye. There were dates, times, and specific locations of planned catastrophes set to unfold in the coming days. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Clara knew she had to act fast. As she attempted to access the system to copy the information, she sensed a presence behind her. Turning, she saw a tall man with a firm posture and a cold stare. He was clearly one of the organization's leaders. The silence between them was heavy, and Clara knew she'd been caught. Before she could react, he began to speak, revealing Ghost's true purpose. He explained that Ghost was a powerful tool, developed to ensure world order through controlled chaos. According to him, some catastrophes were inevitable, but they could be directed to benefit certain interests. The algorithm allowed the organization to predict the effects of each action, ensuring events unfolded in the most advantageous way for those in control. Clara listened, trying to stay calm while searching for an escape. The leader seemed convinced she posed no threat, which might be her only advantage. Feigning movement, Clara activated a small device in her pocket that emitted interference, temporarily disabling the cameras and alarms. Taking advantage of the distraction, she bolted for the door, but the leader reacted quickly, blocking her path. With a swift move, Clara managed to shove him against one of the tables, buying herself just enough time to escape the room. Sprinting down the corridors, she searched for an exit, knowing her time was running out. The building was a labyrinth, but she followed the emergency signs until she finally reached the exit door. Back on the surface, Clara blended into the crowd while the leader, visibly frustrated, watched her from afar. She knew he wouldn't give up easily. The organization had resources and, more than that, the power to manipulate events in their favor. But now, Clara held valuable information and was determined to use it against them. The Ghost operation couldn't continue, and she would do whatever it took to prevent the next catastrophe. For now, though, she needed to vanish again and plan her next move. The shadow of the leader lingered in her mind, but Clara knew she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. Clara didn't have much time to rest. After escaping the building, she took refuge in a cheap motel on the outskirts of New York. She knew she was being hunted, but now she had a clear goal: dismantle Ghost. The information she'd managed to gather indicated that the main server, where the code was stored and operated, was located in an underground facility outside the city. It was a remote spot, ideal for something that had to remain secret. She had no doubt this was the final step, a race against time to destroy the system before it could cause more disasters. The next morning, Clara set out for the site. The road wound through hills and forests, and as she approached, the weight of the mission settled heavily on her. She parked the car at a distance and followed a trail on foot to the facility's entrance. The place seemed deserted, but Clara knew security would be tight. Circling the perimeter, she found a secondary entrance and forced her way in through a ventilation grate. The corridor ahead was empty, and she moved toward the control room. Each step brought a surge of adrenaline, reminding her that any misstep could be her last. When she reached the server room, Clara was struck by the system's complexity. The space was filled with racks of computers and cables stretching across the floor and walls, all pulsing with a cold, calculated energy. In the center of the room, a monitor displayed a constantly updating line of code. She moved closer, connecting her device to the nearest terminal. Within minutes, Clara accessed the system and began deciphering the security layers. Ghost was protected by an almost impenetrable firewall, but she knew exactly where to strike. As she advanced, Clara realized the code was more complex than she'd imagined. Ghost wasn't just predicting events, it had its own intelligence, an adaptive system that responded in real time to variables she couldn't have anticipated. It was almost as if it were alive, reacting to her attempts to shut it down. After minutes of battling with the system, she managed to reach its core. In a matter of seconds, a silent alarm went off, and Clara knew she'd been detected. But she was prepared. As the system tried to reconfigure, Clara launched a virus, a line of code designed to overload Ghost's intelligence and trigger its self-destruction. Before she could complete the operation, footsteps echoed down the hallway. She didn't have time to react before the organization's leader entered the room. The same man from New York, with that cold, calculating look, but this time, he was armed and clearly willing to do whatever it took. He smiled, as if he'd been expecting this moment. Clara knew there would be no negotiations. A confrontation was inevitable. Without taking her eyes off him, she tried to buy herself some time, distracting him while the virus took hold. He began to speak, trying to explain Ghost's purpose, but Clara wasn't listening. She was focused on finishing what she had started. With a swift move, Clara shut off the monitor, cutting access to the main screen. The leader advanced, but she dodged, using the distraction to press the virus activation button. The moment she did, the system began to collapse, emitting a series of overload sounds as the code corrupted itself. The leader shouted, trying to stop her from completing the destruction. They grappled in the middle of the room, each one struggling for control. Clara felt his grip pinning her against one of the servers, but she managed to break free and keep going. The monitors began to flicker, indicating that Ghost was losing stability. In desperation, the leader lunged at her again, but she resisted, determined to finish her mission. Every second felt like an eternity as they clashed in a room falling apart around them. Finally, Clara managed to break away and trigger the virus's final stage. The room erupted in a cacophony of electronic sounds and alarms as the system shut down bit by bit. Ghost had been defeated. With one last look at the leader, Clara backed away, leaving him alone amid the wreckage of his plan. Clara left the facility as the system collapsed entirely. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape. As she walked away, she could hear the distant sounds of servers shutting down, a clear signal that Ghost was finally defeated. She felt a mix of relief and deep exhaustion. She knew she had succeeded, but there was no time to relax yet. Taking one last look back, she saw the organization's leader standing at the entrance, his expression one of defeat but also determination. Clara knew they'd try again someday, perhaps with a new technology, perhaps in a different place. But for now, she had struck a strong enough blow to set them back. Returning to her car, Clara checked her device and realized that, despite her victory, some fragments of Ghost's data were still being transmitted. Parts of the system were still active, even with the core destroyed. It was as if the code had dispersed, surviving in backup servers, waiting to be reactivated. There was nothing more she could do here, but she had the records and could use the information to expose whatever was left of the project. It was time to disappear once more, but this time with a purpose. She pulled out her phone and accessed a secure network, sending the data to a few trusted contacts, people who could help her make the truth known. As she drove, Clara reflected on what she had left behind. Ghost was more than just a code, it was an idea that had taken on a life of its own. It was a reminder of how power could be wielded to control the fate of millions, a tool for domination that, in the wrong hands, could make the whole world suffer. She knew she was carrying a piece of a secret that no one should know, but that at the same time needed to be revealed. After a few hours on the road, Clara found a secure spot where she could hide out for a while. The weight of what she had done began to settle in, but at the same time, she felt a sense of relief. Even if Ghost tried to rise again, she now had the means to face it. In her mind, a new plan was already forming, a way to move forward without ever being caught off guard again. She knew there would always be forces trying to regain control, but now she was stronger and more prepared. Clara vanished into anonymity once again, but this time with a clear mission and purpose. The shadow of Ghost would continue to loom over the world, but Clara, now more determined than ever, was ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but the hope of preventing a new Ghost from emerging kept her focused. And so, as the sun rose on the horizon, Clara headed toward the unknown, knowing that her role in the fight against control had only just begun.